Hello and welcome back. So this is the week 11 schedule video, and this week I'm definitely going to help you win your week. It's a unique schedule and I have a strategy going into the week that could help you win just on volume alone. So let's jump right into the schedule. Now what we have here is a week where most of your competition will be worried about Christmas and travel plans, and since you're here, you're likely going to be worried about waiver ads and maximizing the schedule. Now Week 11 schedule is very unique. This is a week where I can provide you some value because no teams play 4 times, 8 teams only play twice, and there are no games on Saturday or Sunday for the Christmas break. Now, there are 44 games this week, all crammed into 5 days, so no light nights per se. There is one heavy night, and that is Friday, so we'll be looking for a strategy that doesn't include Friday because a lot of your guys that you have on your roster are going to be playing anyways. So what you're going to want to do this week, you're going to want to find 1 or 2 streaming options that play back-to-back games on Monday and Tuesday, and then another streaming option or 2 that play Wednesday and Thursday on a back-to-back, since your lineup will likely be full on Friday. So, knowing that, which team's schedule set up for this? The 2 best front half back-to-backs are Columbus and St. Louis. They're actually the only 2 that have a Monday-Tuesday back-to-back. But there are options to be had here. So as we look at the schedule, Columbus has the slightly easier schedule if you look at the defenses they're up against. Dallas is 19th in expected goals for, 17th in actual goals against. Goals against, not goals for. 17th in actual goals against. Philly is second last in the league in expected goals against, and 15th in actual goals against, thanks to an amazing first 25 games or so from Carter Hart. Now, Hart has come back down to earth a little bit, and so have the Flyers. But it is interesting that Columbus is now last in the league in goals against, so these 2 games could be goal fests, especially with the way that Dallas scores. Now, for St. Louis, they take on the Canucks, who bleed goals left and right, even with Spencer Martin slightly better than Thatcher Demko this season. But then they have the very tight Seattle Kraken, who are 7th best in expected goals against, 9th in actual goals against, and they have the 6th most goals for in the league. So that'll be a tough matchup for St. Louis on Tuesday night. But knowing all of this, who can you target from these teams for the first half of the week? So Columbus does have a few good options. The only problem is that 3 of them are centers. So Boone Jenner is the best waiver option for Columbus on a regular basis. He's mainly good for shots, where he's 91st percentile in the league. He's good for goals. He's 87th percentile in goals for the league. But he's around 75th percentile in every other category, giving him a good floor. Now, the case for Jenner this week is that he's the Blue Jackets' leading scorer with 7 points in 5 games against the Flyers since 2019. So he's a guy who gets it done against Philly. He's currently centering Johnny Gaudreau and Gustav Nyquist as they put line A on the second line to balance out their roster. But he does center power play 1 as well, so that's a nice exposure for both games. Obviously you're going to want him against the Flyers, but you're getting him for both games, and he's on the first power play unit with a lot of those high-powered offensive players. And speaking of line A and power play 1, Jack Roslovic is centering line A on line 2 and also factors into power play 1 for Columbus. And if you look at his stats there on the screen, it does look good, but that was all 1 game last week against Los Angeles, and he went cold after that again. So he does lead the Jackets in points against the Dallas Stars, which is why I'm highlighting him here. 9 points in 10 games versus Dallas, 2 goals, 7 assists. So what that means is that Roslovic either has good luck or likes to play against Dallas, and Jenner the same type of thing against Philly. Now, along that same line of thought, Sean Corrali, only 3% owned. He's the 2nd leading scorer for the Jackets against the Flyers with 5 points in his last 4 games against them, 2 goals, 3 assists, and he's getting hits as well, averaging 2.5 hits per game. Now, speaking of hits, we have our main D ad this week for the Blue Jackets, and it's a hits and blocks specialist in Eric Gudbranson. Only 1% owned, 1.93 hits per game, ranks him in the 78th percentile in the league, while his 1.71 blocks per game ranks him in the 90th percentile of players in the league for that category. So he's getting it done for hits and blocks, and this is a week where, again, if you need a hits and blocks guy, you pick up one guy like Gudbranson for the Monday-Tuesday back-to-back, and then you try to pick somebody else up for the Wednesday-Thursday. Now, last and definitely least, they'll have to use 2 goalies for this back-to-back, but I'd personally stay away from Columbus goaltending in general, as they are last in the league in goals against, and Merzlikins ranks last in goals saved above expected at -18. So they've been playing Tarasov a lot. They've given Korpisalo a couple of starts, but I just will not touch Columbus goaltending, and you probably shouldn't either. With St. Louis, the first thing I want to mention is Jordan Kyrou, 76% owned. If he's available, go pick him up. Last week, he had 3 goals, 3 assists, 1 power play point, 19 shots, and was Yahoo ranked 30. So the fact that he isn't completely owned up is an opportunity to grab him. But the problem with St. Louis in general is that a lot of their top guys are between 50 and 80% ownership, which means they're all available in shallow leagues, but none of them are available in 14-team leagues or deeper. So the leading scorer for the Blues against each of these 2 opponents that they have in this back-to-back is Vlad Tarasenko, but he's at 90% ownership. So the next best thing is Brayden Schenn at 58%. He's a dual-eligible center left wing, and if you look at it, he's got 7 points in his last 7 games, a goal and 6 assists, but he's got 3 points and 10 shots in his last 3 games against Vancouver, and he's got 2 points in the only game that the Blues have played against Seattle. So that's a good, favorable matchup for Brayden Schenn against both of these opponents. And similarly, Robert Thomas, almost an identical file, 7 points in the last 7 games, a couple more goals, 3 goals, 4 assists in that time span. Same type of thing, 3 points in 4 games against Vancouver and 2 points against Seattle. So those 2 guys are probably the best options, but they are a little bit owned up in the mid-50s. So we have 2 more options that are peripheral options, more so than offensive production guys, and that's Ivan Barbashev and Noel Acciari. Now, sometimes in fantasy, you'll see players like this and not know how to make a distinction between the 2. So this is where I'd like to introduce you to the Data Draft 22-23 Players Hub. So what you're looking at here is the Players Hub, and what you do, you go to the top here, you type in a player. We're going to look at Barbashev, if I could spell it right. And then what you get here at the top is his per game metrics. So this is most of the categories that you'll find in fantasy on a per game level, and then what percentile that player ranks in each of these categories. So what you'll see with Barbashev, he has a pretty high floor in terms of he's above 50% in every one of these categories except for blocks, slightly above 50% in goals, but he's mainly a hits guy at 2.07 hits per game. That kind of checks out. But compare that with Noel Acciari. If I could spell his name, and I'd had it right there. There it is. So if you look at Acciari, his hits per game average is way higher. 96th percentile in hits per game, 3.03. And he does get some blocks too at 1.07. And then on top of that, he has pretty decent goal production for being a hits guy. So he's in the 79th percentile in terms of hits. So again, you can play around with this yourself. If you have any waiver options, any trade targets, or any guys on your roster that you're looking to potentially see how they perform compared to the rest of the league, this is percentile graph is going to give you a sense of what their potential value is in fantasy. So just do another one here. Let's look at Aaron Ekblad. What's he good at? Well, he's a really good power play producer. He's a really good shots producer. Pretty good for blocks. Not that bad for hits. You can see he covers pretty much everything and does it really well. Then if you look at a guy like Larson, it's a complete different story. Hits per game, blocks per game. Elite level in both. Nothing on the power play. And then you get a little bit lower percentages for everything else. A couple of, 0.31 points per game, not great, not bad. But this will give you like a 30,000 foot view of what each player is good at for fantasy. Now, as we get back to the schedule, just a quick reminder, you can get the 22-23 and the 21-22 Players Hubs in the Patreon link in the description below, and you can play around with all of that stuff yourself, and it can help you make some better fantasy decisions going forward. But let's quickly take a look back at the schedule and look at the second half back-to-backs, or more precisely, the Wednesday-Thursday back-to-backs. And there's only one team that has that, and it belongs to Minnesota. So they only play twice this week, which would normally scare you away, but if you're applying the strategy that I suggested, this is perfect. So not only do they play Wednesday, Thursday back-to-back, but they have two of the three worst defensive teams in the league in Anaheim and San Jose. So let's see who you can grab from Minnesota for this chunk of the schedule. So before we get into guys you can grab off the wire, let's shout out Matt Zuccarello. 11 points in his last 7 games, 5 goals, 6 assists, 5 power play points, 24 shots, and a 4-point night with a hat trick against Chicago. So he's been getting it done. Obviously, that top line is owned up, so you're probably not going to get access to them. But our top ad for this week is Freddie Gaudreau, only 10% owned, 3 position eligible. I streamed him last week and took advantage, got some good production out of him instead of going for a guy like Sam Steele, who's less proven. 3 goals in his last 3 games. He's currently listed as the second-line center with Boldy and Hartman, who's coming back from an upper body injury. And speaking of Hartman, he's another guy on this list. Last year, he was an excellent fantasy option, centering Zuccarello and Kaprizov. This year, he's only played 9 games. He has 5 points. His ownership is reflecting the thought process that he'll come back into the lineup and center that top line. But if this line assignment changes between now and Wednesday, that could make some sense. But with Hartman currently listed with Gaudreau and Boldy, the ownership should be a little bit lower in my opinion. Now, if you look here, on the left, you have last year's player hub. So he's really good in terms of shot production, 94th percentile in goal production, mainly because he was playing with 2 of the best setup guys in the league. This year, you can see the goal production drastically down. Now, again, it's a small sample size, so this could come back up, especially if he gets on that top line again, but he's not on it right now. So what he's good for right now is assist production and shots, but he's still not in the top, elite level, upper echelon, 90-plus percentile in terms of either of those categories. But he does get a couple hits as well, so that could be an interesting little boost to his file. And then if you look here, he's got 9 points in his last 14 games against Anaheim and 10 points in his last 14 games against San Jose, which is a little bit below a point per game, but it's probably the best you're going to find on the waiver wire in terms of wild players playing against those 2 particular teams. Now, a few weeks back, I said that Minnesota was actually 6th best in goal differential, and if Marc-Andre Fleury could start making some saves, they'd start winning some games, and that it could be a good buy low opportunity on Fleury. Well, it happened. So last week, Fleury 2 games, 2 wins, 1 goal against average in each game, and a .961 save percentage. But the play that I've also been giving out for the last few weeks now is Philip Gustafsson, now 36% owned and playing out of his mind in a limited sample size over the last 2 weeks. But if you look at it, 2 games, 2 wins, a .50 goals against, and a .981 save percentage with a shutout in there against the Canucks. So he'll see one of these 2 games, and he's absolutely the number 1 goalie target this week, just based on everything that I just mentioned. But that does bring us to the Week 11 goalie ads, and a lot of this list is unchanged from last week. So you see guys like Vladar, Gustafsson, Kochetkov, Ranta, all names we saw last week. Vladar's play has slipped a little bit the last 2 games, and the Flames are winless in 5. But he will have to start one of those back-to-back games against LA and Anaheim. So if you're in need of a goalie stream, that's definitely an option you could go to. We just covered Gustafsson, so we'll move on to Kochetkov, and he still looks excellent. His ownership has been climbing rapidly, now up to 63%, so he may not be available for you. And to be honest, I still don't know what they're going to do with Ranta when Anderson comes back and is fully healthy, but Kochetkov has drastically outplayed Ranta this year and basically stolen his job. But the Canes do have a back-to-back against Pittsburgh and Philly, and maybe Freddie Anderson sees some time this week. We'll have to wait and see, but definitely something to monitor. But you may not be able to get Kochetkov with that ownership percentage. So who's a little bit lower owned up? How about Phoenix Copley? Now, I don't know how many of you remember me giving him out 2 weeks ago before he even played an NHL game this year. But since then, he's been phenomenal, and he's basically stabilized the Kings' goaltending for the time being. If you compare his numbers versus Jonathan Quick, he's clearly been the better option. If you look at 5 games played, 4 wins, 2.71 goals against, and a .904 save percentage, which is right around league average, and you compare that to Jonathan Quick, who's been one of the worst goalies in the league in terms of save percentage and goals saved below expected. And obviously the choice is clear when it comes to fantasy ownership. Phoenix Copley's only 7% owned, whereas Quick is 62% owned, which makes no sense to me if you're just looking at the numbers. And then if you look at his game log down here, very excellent for Phoenix Copley. If you take out this one game here where he got lit up against the Sabres, now I watched a lot of that game. it was a pretty close game. Even deep into the third, they kind of made it, a little bit less of a game late, adding in a couple of goals. But if you take that out, he's got a .927 save percentage and a .192 goals against since this start against Ottawa. So one bad game. Otherwise, very good numbers for Copley. And he may actually challenge to take the number 1 spot in LA because they are just desperate for goaltending. They're a pretty decent team otherwise. They just have not been getting saves. They're one of the worst teams in terms of their combined goaltending saves below expected. So if they can get average goaltending out of Copley, they will start to stabilize and start to climb up the Pacific Division standings. Now, the Devils also have a back-to-back against Carolina and Florida on Tuesday, Wednesday, which schedule-wise may be more favorable than a Thursday, Friday when you have your goalies playing on a Friday. Right now, Akira Schmid is the play, 16% owned, 8 games played, 5 wins, 3 losses, a .196 and a .932 save percentage. But it is worth mentioning that Mackenzie Blackwood is down in the AHL on a conditioning assignment. He had a bad start in his first game down there, 4 goals on 22 shots and a loss, but he did bounce back with a win against Bridgeport where he put up a .939 save percentage and a 2.0 goals against. Now, conditioning stints can last up to 14 days, so he may not be back before Christmas, but if he is back and you're desperate for another goalie start, and if you see him recalled, he could be the guy to grab. The Devils has started to slip a little bit. They've lost, I think, 4 or 5 in a row at this point, but their defense is still pretty good. And their goaltending is still solid. Now, last but not least, Semyon Varlamov. On the year, he's been excellent. 8-3-1, 12 starts, a 2.65 goals against, and a .919 save percentage with 1 shutout. Now, the Isles have back-to-back games at the Garden against the Rangers, then back home against the Panthers. And I'd imagine they'll start Sorokin against the Panthers, and Varlamov will play against the Rangers. Why? Well, I mentioned this before. He is the Rangers' kryptonite. Since January 2021, Varlamov is 7-3 against the Rangers with a .172 goals against, a .939 save percentage, and 5 shutouts. So if he gets that start, he becomes the goalie ad of the week, especially since it's a Thursday night, which is slightly lighter than the Friday night, especially if you've got all of your goalies playing Friday night and you know that Varlamov is going to get that Thursday night start. That would be the ad if you're looking to boost your goaltending. If you're deeper in the week and you're behind in goaltending, that's the guy you're going to want to go out and grab. Now, as we move to the Week 11 hot players, not much has changed, but I do want to mention a few things. Number 1, Jared McCann is still a great option for goals. You can see him here. He's 7.1 above expected, but he's still scoring at a pretty decent pace. Number 2, Erik Karlsson has slipped down this list. He used to be a little bit higher. Now he's a little bit further down. In his last 30 days, 1 goal, 10 assists, 4 power play points, 36 shots. But the only the 1 goal means he's falling down this list, and he's still definitely fantasy ownable. A lot of people are starting to worry about him a little bit, but he is fantasy ownable. He's just not at that elite, world-beating pace that he was on in the first part of the season. The third thing I wanted to mention is Reilly Smith, who you see here. This is his player hub, and we'll get into that in just a second. He's a dual-eligible left wing, right wing, 50% owned. He's now on this list. He's got 4 goals, 2 assists, 6 points in his last 7 games, 2 power play points, and 17 shots. And getting to the player hub, which again you can find in the Patreon link in the description below, he's in the 94th percentile in goals, which makes him elite level in that category. And that .44 goal per game, that's on pace for 36 goals in an 82-game season. So he'll likely at least break 30 goals if he can stay healthy. And again, he's only 50% owned, so you can probably get him in most 12-team leagues. The last thing I wanted to mention is Clayton Keller. 5 goals, 3 assists, 2 power play points, 19 shots in his last 7 games. He's 68% owned, and he's been an excellent fantasy option this year despite Arizona's lack of team success. If you look at his player hub, you'll notice that he's been better than Smith overall. He's 92nd percentile in points per game. He's 90th in goals per game, 93rd percentile in assists per game, and he's 89th percentile in power play points. So he's getting it done on the power play. He's getting assists, goals, and overall point production. The shots are okay. They're a little bit below 2 per game, which is not targetable, but it's not bad at all. So this is how you can kind of use the player hub to differentiate between two good and relatively equal players. Both are dual eligible wingers. Both, one has a little bit higher ownership than the other. And this is why, because he covers a couple more categories, whereas you're only getting realistically goal production and shot production with a little bit of power play production out of Reilly Smith. You're getting a little bit more out of Clayton Keller. But he is definitely an excellent option. He was 16th best fantasy player in category leagues over the last week. So this is something to keep an eye on, especially if you're in a shallow league. This is one of those that falls into the file of good players on poor teams that are getting it done. Now, as we turn to the goals below expected list, which I've now renamed the Eric Haula list, you'll notice Hyman and Haula haven't moved at all, but Eric Haula did have a goal and an assist last game versus the Panthers, so maybe he's breaking out. He went 12 games without a goal before that, so let's hope the monkey is off his back and he'll start climbing down this list. But the next thing you'll notice is that there were 4 Senators on this list, and now there's only 3. So what happened to Drake Batherson? Last week, 3 goals, 2 assists, 4 power play points, 9 shots in 3 games. So dare I say he broke out? It's kind of looking like that. And that's what we're looking for by looking at this list. Guys who are on this list are snake bitten and they're about to break out, and Drake Batherson definitely did so. And on top of that, Tyler Mott also scored a goal yesterday, climbing down this list a little bit. And then Alex DeBrincat hasn't necessarily broken out goal scoring wise the way that Batherson did, but he was the 3rd best fantasy player in the entire league last week in category leagues. He had 2 goals, 6 assists, 8 points, 6 of those on the power play, 14 shots in only 3 games. So I think it's safe to say that DeBrincat broke out as well. So that's kind of what we're looking for. We're looking for guys on this list. We're targeting them if we can. Now, most of those guys were owned up except for Tyler Mott. But you're looking for guys on this list that are about to break out, and 2 or 3 of those guys did break out last week. And, Haula didn't break out, but he started scoring, so that's a positive sign. The next thing I noticed on this list is who the hell is Cole Smith? If you can see right here, -4 or 4 goals below expected. I didn't know who he was, so I had to look him up. He's a left wing in Nashville. I checked his player hub. He's 93rd percentile in hits per game with 2.75. But he's also getting some quality chances apparently, despite the lack of shot volume, where he only has 1 shot per game. He's 0% owned, so if you're in a 24-team league or something, definitely go grab Cole Smith. But then last but not least, I did want to address Patrick Kane. So what you see on the left is a card from evolvinghockey.com, which shows Kane's advanced stats per 60 minutes. Goals for, expected goals against, and Corsi against. And what this is showing us is that Kane has been horrendous defensively. And to me, that indicates he's not really engaged. He's going through the motions a bit, but it also means that his team just isn't good enough at all. If you only looked at the chart on the left, you would think that Kane isn't worth it in fantasy this year. But the difference between some other advanced stats and the Data Draft Player Hub is that this is directly correlated to fantasy. So you'll notice on the Player Hub, Kane is 91st percentile in assists, 97th percentile in shots, which was a little bit surprising to me. He's averaging 3.57 shots per game. And then his power play production is elite level as well, 95th percentile, 0.43 power play points per game. So this tells you a little bit more of the fantasy picture. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is that he's averaging 0.75 points per game, which is 64% lower than his 5-year average of 1.16 points per game, which tells me that there's still room for improvement in overall points. And the obvious area of improvement is goal production, where he's only in the 56th percentile. And that brings us to here. He's 4 goals below expected. So I'd still consider Patrick Kane an excellent buy low option. And I'd expect his goal total won't increase until he gets traded because he doesn't really have a lot to work with. The only thing I'd say to tamper expectations about that potential trade option is that the fact that he's played in his entire career in Chicago, and guys that usually play their entire career and then get traded at the deadline, Claude Giroux was an example last year, they usually don't come off that trade and, completely, come out on fire and start scoring like, a ridiculous pace. Maybe that happens in the playoffs for Patrick Kane, but we'll have to wait and see because there is room for improvement in his file. And even if you're not going to wait for that improvement, he's still elite level in assists, shots, and power play points. Now, this week in THHL, I just want to let you all know that I beat AC Delaware River, my arch rival, and I took first place after that win. So I've been on a week-long bender, partying nonstop. I showed up at 2 a.m. outside his house, blasting "We Are the Champions" last Sunday night. No, I'm just kidding. But this week, I have the Zodiac Braves. He's pretty much down and out. I'm up 7-1, only a handful of games to go. And this brings me to a data draft strategy check-in. So you see this graph on the right. This is the offensive category win percentage, and the goaltending category win percentage on the bottom. So what this shows you is he's very good in his combined win percentage, 108%. I'm a little bit below him, but I've got the better offense. Obviously, we're in a categories league with 6 offensive categories and 4 goalie categories, so naturally offense is more important, but you can see that in the graph, and you can see that in how we drafted. If you look at the draft, we both did pretty well for ourselves. He got those 2 elite defensemen that I mentioned. He got 2 G1s, and he didn't do it in the first 2 rounds, which is something that I also mentioned. Those were 2 of the tenets of the data draft strategy. He even found some excellent value deeper in the draft. He got Marchand in the 7th. He got Bergeron in the 8th, Pavelski in the 9th, Tavares in the 11th, Linus Ullmark, the second best goalie in fantasy so far this year, in the 13th round. So he did really well deeper, but he didn't pick up a single forward until the 6th round, and as a result, his offense is lacking, and he's only won 44% of his offensive categories. And that's why he's probably losing to me this week. So I did get lucky. I got the first overall pick with McDavid, but he had 2 chances to grab Pastrnak and didn't, and I have Pastrnak as well, and he's the 3rd best fantasy player this year. But I did follow the data draft blueprint. I grabbed my 2 elite offensive defensemen. I have Ekblad and Carlson here. You look at where I picked my goaltending. These are where I picked my defensemen, and I have a much better offense because I didn't just go D heavy and goalie heavy in the top part of the draft. So this is something to keep in mind for next season as you're planning your draft. But it is also something to keep in mind for this season because you can still salvage this. If I were trying to talk to Zodiac Braves, I'd say trade one of your elite goalies for an elite offensive player. He's got Anderson probably sitting on the IR. Kemper might be on the IR right now. But he does have Linus Ullmark, so that frees you up to trade one of those guys for an elite offensive player. But the takeaway from this, know your league format, understand it before the draft, use the data draft strategy, don't draft a goalie in the first 2 rounds. You want those 2 elite defensemen and all the other things that I mentioned in the draft strategy series, and make sure you have a high-powered offense. Now, you'll also notice I only have 1 of the 3 goalies that I drafted, and we're not even halfway through the season, which proves that they are easier to find through trades and waiver options than elite offensive producers. But that's going to do it for this week's video. Tomorrow, I'll go over the Week 10 top producers, so stay tuned for that video. Remember, you can now access the 22-23 and 21-22 player hubs in the Patreon link in the description below. You can also follow me on Instagram at data_draft. For more updates and news. I'll be sure to update that going forward. Usually if I don't have time for a video, I update the Instagram. Remember to like and subscribe and all that other good stuff for YouTube and all the algorithm stuff. But thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.